and thanks everyone for coming out. I was also told to announce that this show will be broadcast on Saturday at 8 a.m., Sunday at 9 a.m. on the SiriusXM Insight channel. And it's also on the website, engineering.stanford.edu. And I believe on Facebook Live, we have thousands of other people around the world who are listening at the same time as you. So this is the first live taping of this show, The Future of Everything. But there have been a number of broadcasts prior to this one. But let me back up a little bit and just say something about the motivation for the show. So one of the best things I get to do as Dean of Engineering is learn about all the amazing research that's going on around the school. We have about 270 faculty and thousands of students who are working on just amazing things. When I have to put it in one sentence, I would say we do fundamental research that attacks very difficult and important societal problems. And both of those are equally important, the fundamental research part and the fact that we apply that research to tackle problems that the world cares about and needs to address. Examples, you'll probably think of the same ones: energy, the environment, healthcare, cities of the future, cybersecurity. We recently had a long-range planning process where we identified 10 questions that the School of Engineering can be part of answering together with our colleagues across campus. So the purpose of this radio show is to highlight the research that we're working on, again, that addresses these societal challenges, and specifically to do so from different disciplines and different perspectives. How many of you have heard in the previous shows? Have some people listened to them? Okay, quite a few. There was one with law professor Hank Greeley on the future of sex and reproduction. John DeBeery is a new faculty member in mechanical and civil engineering. He talked about renewable energy and technology inspired by nature. Some of you might have come to the Intersections event a couple weeks ago and heard John DeBeery talk there. Chemical engineering professor Zhenan Bao talked about flexible electronics and synthetic human skin. So in this show, we're going to have two very engaging faculty members. One will be Professor of Computer Science Fei-Fei Li, and she will be talking about artificial intelligence. And Chris Gerdes, who's a professor of mechanical engineering, will be talking about autonomous vehicles. But before you meet them, I'm going to introduce your host, Russ Altman. So I'm going to say a few things about you. I'm not sure you were supposed to come out yet.
Well, I like to listen.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you have some fans, that's for sure. You have some fans in the front. Okay, so when he's not a radio host, and by the way, when I heard he was a radio host, I thought, what perfect person to be a radio host. But when he's not, he is a professor of bioengineering, of genetics, of medicine, of biomedical data science, and by courtesy of my own department, computer science, and a past chair of bioengineering. So quite a long list.
I treasure all those appointments.
Your business card must have small font. Okay. In terms of research, I've long been familiar with Russ's research. Again, I'm a computer scientist. I work with data, and he applies computing and informatics technologies to problems relevant to medicine. Pretty much exactly what I would describe: fundamental research. Fundamental research that's applied to important societal problems. He has an AB from Harvard College. I think I've heard of that place. In biochemistry and molecular biology. Then he saw the light and came to Stanford for both a PhD and an MD degree. It tells me the years here, but I'll leave those out. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Russ Altman and the future of everything.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Dean Whittam. Let's give it up to Dean Whittam. Thank you very much. Yeah. And hello, Cubberley. I love Cubberley. So you just heard an introduction, so I can cancel most of what I was going to say. I am the host of The Future of Everything with Russ Altman, and I just wanted to tell you how we got here. Like, what's up? Why are we doing this radio show? You heard about what it's for. Let me tell you my story. So SiriusXM, our partner, must be somewhere. Yeah, there it is. They have shows like this. They have, in fact, channels, one with NYU focused on medical stuff. People call in, get medical advice, and that's been, I think, a success for them. And then they did one with Wharton, the School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, and again, that's business stuff, and they said, we need to do science and technology. And to our fortune at Stanford, they were smart, and they called up, I guess, our communications office at Stanford and said, we do this with Wharton, we do this with NYU. Would you be interested potentially in having a Stanford-type channel? And more importantly, could you imagine any faculty member who would ever want to do this? So I guess because I give talks to alums now and then, and so the communications office might know me from that, and I've done a couple of TED-type talks. I guess my name popped up, and I remember this very clearly. I got an email saying, Russ, would you ever be interested in hosting a radio show about science and technology? So I remember getting that, and I remember my one-line response was, I am intensely interested. And so, okay, then they brought me into the studio and they said, we need to see if you suck. So this is serious radio. We're not going to use profanities tonight, but if we wanted to, we could. Ask Howard Stern. So they had me come in and they had me do a practice interview with one of my colleagues, to whom I will always be grateful because I was kind of clueless. And they said, okay, that's pretty good. Now we need you to do one more thing. I said, fine, what do you want me to do? They said, we need you to come into the studio and can you just talk, whoops. I gotta fix, this is radio, so I need to fix my mic here. It's not a mic. I need to learn the words in radio as well. It's an earphone. Hey, somebody say something to me. Hello. Yeah, good. Okay, we got it. Do I have to start from the top? I'm not going to start from the top. Okay. So they said, that was pretty good, Russ, but can you come into the studio and just talk for 30 minutes? And I said, well, why? Yeah, but why? They said, well, in the radio, sometimes there's dead time, and we have to make sure that you can, talk if you need to talk. So I came into the studio. I brought a couple of stories that I thought were mildly entertaining, and suffice it to say that at 35 minutes, they were going, okay, cut, and then you're hired. You can talk. So it's a fun job because really I'm talking to my colleagues in this kind of semi-formal setting, really finding out why they do what they do and what they do. So that was great. You've heard that we've had about 14 interviews. These are available. Of course, it's aired on SiriusXM. They're also available at stanfordradio.stanford.edu. But this is our first live show, and I'm very, as I believe the word is, stoked. Now, a little crowd participation. Dean Whittam did this a second ago, but I want to do a little bit more. Who has even listened to 1 second of this show previous to today? Thank you very much. Who has listened to an entire episode? Be honest. Okay. Who is pretty sure they've listened to every episode so far? God bless you. He's one of my executive producers. Okay, well, by the end of today, you will have heard 1 complete episode, and so congratulations. I think with that, we are ready to do this, so let's do it. Thank you very much.
Stanford Radio presents The Future of Everything in front of a live audience at the Cubberley Auditorium at Stanford University on SiriusXM Insight.
Everything is changing. There's science and technology coming down the pike that you need to understand and be ready for.
Featuring Director of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Labs, Fei-Fei Li, and Director for the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford, Chris Gerdes.
The future of everything.
Now, here's your host, Russ Altman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Brian, I can't hear your voice. So let's just do a check. Again. Welcome to live radio. I'm on 11. Oh, maybe 11, maybe. Okay, so we need some help here. Not hearing anything, and I need my cues. Sorry. Whoa, really loud. How do I make it? Do you want to take it from the top? Let me hear you again. Good. Okay. We're going to have you reclaim that enthusiasm that you had a few minutes ago. Take it from the top.
Stanford Radio presents The Future of Everything in front of a live audience at the Cubberley Auditorium at Stanford University on SiriusXM Insight.
Everything is changing. There's science and technology coming down the pike that you need to understand and be ready for.
Featuring Director of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Labs, Fei-Fei Li, and Director for the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford, Chris Gerdes.
The future of everything.
Now, here's your host, Russ Altman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and welcome to Cubberley Auditorium at Stanford University. You know, since the first computers, since the dawn of computation in the 1950s, we have been fascinated by the idea of having computers displaying some kind of intelligence, similar to what humans display. If you go to the source of all knowledge, the internet, and check for the definition of intelligence, here's a couple of my favorites from the dictionaries online. The ability to learn or understand or deal with new or trying situations. Okay. Alternatively, ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. So, artificial intelligence has come to mean intelligence as manifested by computers. It is artificial, presumably, because it is not the natural kind of intelligence that we humans display. And actually, you could argue some animals as well. Now, a key criteria is often the requirement for a broad and flexible intelligence. A computer program that does a specific thing very well, we say, well, that's impressive, good job, but it's not really intelligent in the sense that a broad range of inputs can come in and it can do okay. So the ability to respond to a variety of challenges and succeed or fail gracefully is also kind of worked into this definition. We think about HAL in 2001, A Space Odyssey, which most of you who are less than 40 have no idea what I'm talking about. The Star Trek computers and Galaxy Quest computers, and all the ones on TV shows. Now, my PhD, even though I'm a physician and I studied biology, was actually in an artificial intelligence lab in the computer science department here. And we worked on specialized systems that used logic and rules to try to achieve high performance in medical and biological scientific tasks. And there was a lot of hype. This was in the mid-'80s. A lot of hype and a lot of expectations. And I think you could say that those expectations in the mid-'80s, early '90s, were not met. And in fact, we stopped using the word artificial intelligence because it became a little bit of a joke among our colleagues who said, yeah, that was very artificial and not very intelligent. In fact, we started calling it computational thinking. But in the last few years, AI, as I will now call it, AI, artificial intelligence, has made incredible progress. It's in our lives every day, and our colleagues have created systems that function in these broad categories like speech recognition, image interpretation, predicting behaviors, controlling cars, that'll be for the next segment, and also controlling other devices. Well, my guest today is, as you've heard, is Fei-Fei Li of the Stanford Computer Science Department and a real expert in AI, particularly in the area of image analysis. Fei-Fei, would you join me? Please give it up for Fei-Fei Li. So I'm not even sure we're aware of all the ways that AI is or is about to affect our lives, or what it might lead to in the long term. So to start out, can you describe for us some of the current uses of AI and the ones that are really about to happen?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you, Russ, for inviting me to this. You said you can talk non-stop for 30 minutes. I was really sweating. That's not my skill. So yes, in a way, artificial intelligence, for someone who has been in this field of technology for almost 20 years, is really the computation and computing of data in intelligent ways. It is already everywhere. You mentioned speech recognition, Siri or Echo, Google Home. These are all the AI product from speech recognition area. In image analysis and computer vision, which is the home field of my research, we're already seeing a lot of progress in photo tagging, whether it's Google Photo or Facebook. In medical imaging, there is a flurry of work recently by places like Stanford and Google, where scientists are recognizing cancers from medical images at the ability like doctors. And self-driving car, which we will be talking with Chris later, is really also very much a result of multi-areas of AI research.
So that's fascinating. And let me ask you, what happened in the last 10 years? Can we put our finger on any one or two factors, or was this just going to happen all along? And tell me a story about how these technologies just kind of seem to pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I can tell you a story. So I joined the field of AI in, if you count the day of PhD as the beginning of entering a field, is in the year of 2000. And like you said, AI was a little bit of a dirty word, and we don't talk about it. I was in computer vision and machine learning. And that was the time that it was the dawn of machine learning, statistical method in understanding data and do modeling, and it was already in hindsight the thawing of the ice, where things are starting to change. So starting my generation in late 90s, early 2000, a lot of work in the field of AI is building the theoretical foundations and machine learning tools to process and analyze data. But something else was quietly happening outside of the laboratory. And again, that thing later played one of the biggest roles in the rebirth of AI, or renaissance of AI, and that was the internet. I remember.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. I remember as a first year or second year graduate student at Caltech, so Southern California, we started to hear our Stanford and Berkeley friends started telling us there is this easier search engine called Google, the Alta Vista. Okay. So in the first 10 years of the 21st century, the world is experiencing an explosive growth of the internet age and the cyber, the information age. So as the AI scientists are building the tools, the machine learning tools, the world is starting to be filled with data, especially data from the cyberspace, and also as the sensors and devices start to pick up the pace, the way of capturing data also start multiplying. So quietly, these two things, along with the progress of computing and hardware, the Moore's law that was carrying the information age, really started to converge in a way that most people didn't expect. So towards the very end of the first decade of 21st century, around 2010, 2011, 2012, the field of AI suddenly playing with a lot of data, using algorithms that have gone through generations of trials and errors, and starting to see the amazing effect. One of the key moment, I think, that a lot of you have heard of, especially in Silicon Valley, the key moment of deep learning or neural network was 2012. I almost...
Hold that thought. We're going to talk about 2012 in one
Okay,
moment.
all right.
But first, I have to tell you that this is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman, and I'm talking to Fei Li, director of the Stanford AI Lab and the Stanford Vision Lab. We're talking about AI and what happened in 2012.
Yes, 2012. So 5 years between that, I was a young assistant professor at Princeton, and I was working in the field of computer vision and image recognition. And I was frustrated with the slow progress of the field, because vision is so rich for you and me. We open our eyes, we understand the world. Every single pixel has its color, its meaning, its context. We see hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of objects. We talk to each other, we socialize. It's all about vision. Yet, the field of computer vision was recognizing a few objects, like airplane if it's sideways, or human faces if it's frontal, and
That would not count as AI.
right. And I was thinking, what can we do to change that? And I started a little bit of a crazy project called ImageNet. And the project was inspired by something that natural language and linguist field had started called WordNet. And it was a Princeton linguist, George Miller. When I arrived at Princeton, he was very, very senior. He was in his 90s. George Miller used by hand, put together an English lexicon data set ontology of nearly 100,000 English terms in a structure that's called WordNet. And I looked at that structure and was talking to my linguist friends, and we had this idea, can we populate the world of images with that structure and create a huge data ontology that can feed into our algorithms? So I started that ImageNet project, and it took, long story short, it took 3 years of...
And this was mostly taking advantage of internet images.
Right. So what we did is we downloaded billions and billions of images from Google, Yahoo. At that time, there are other search engines now you've never heard of, and also we were cleaning it by hand, like labeling the images, sorting them. And I told my graduate student at that time, by the computation of where we want to go for ImageNet, he's going to take 19 years to graduate.
That is not good.
He didn't appreciate that. So I think he was depressed, and I was worried. And then we heard something we've never heard of. We heard a thing called Amazon Mechanical Turk, and that was 2007. Amazon Mechanical Turk was rolled out in late 2006.
This is a service where you pay small amounts of money for people all over the world to help you with a task.
Exactly. And at that time, we decided we're going to farm out this entire task of image labeling to the entire world. Long story short, around 2008, we were employing about 50,000 workers around 167 countries online to help us with ImageNet. And after 3 years, we got a data set that the field of AI has never seen before. It was 15 million images organized in this entire WordNet function, ontology. And then
Ontology is like an organization of all your knowledge into bins and categories, just since we've used that word a couple times.
That's why you're a radio host.
Yes. and I want to get to your health applications.
Okay, so quickly, so 2012 is Once we have ImageNet, we opened it to the world, and we wanted to invite the whole world's AI machine learning scientists to start working on the problem of image processing, image classification. So we hosted, during that time I already moved to Stanford. We hosted a Stanford and University of Northern Carolina challenge every year called ImageNet Challenge. And then, we were seeing some progress, but 2012 is the year that Jeff Hinton from University of Toronto and his student used an old algorithm. This is what's shocking to a lot of people who are not in the field of AI, is you probably have heard of AI or deep learning just now. It was a very, very it was a method with a long tradition developed in the 70s and 80s called neural network, specifically convolutional neural network. And they submitted the results to ImageNet Challenge in September. When we got the result, I have to confess, as an organizer, I was shocked. It halved the error rate.
You thought they were cheating.
It was Jeff Hinton.
Yeah,
he
so
wasn't
maybe
cheating.
not Jeff.
I trust Jeff. I was just so amazed by the result. I remember my student who was running the challenge called me at night and said, Fei, we got a winning algorithm that we didn't expect.
So let me fast forward, because I want people to hear the story of the kinds of things you're trying to now, really derivative from that image analysis work. Tell me what you're doing in healthcare setting, because it's just surprising.
So yes, so fast forward, as AI is showing its power in image recognition, in human activity understanding, I started to think really deeply of AI's reach to the application areas. And to me, one of the most important, deeply personal area that I care about is healthcare. So I started a collaboration with a Professor Arnie Milstein. He's also a professor in your School of Medicine, looking, his life's work is looking at improving healthcare quality and reducing cost. And we started to really bond and sparkle some ideas about using AI to play the guardian angel role in healthcare, in treatments, in patient care. So here's an example. As we speak now, the Lucille Packard Hospital, Children's Hospital at Stanford, has an entire hospital unit that has our sensors, our depth sensors installed in the hallways and patient rooms to help doctors and nurses monitor hand hygiene practice. It turns out hand hygiene is one of the biggest cause of hospital-acquired infection, which is a top killer of patients in hospitals.
We're going to talk more about the health applications.
Right.
We'll have more with Fei about the future of artificial intelligence and these exciting applications on the future of everything here on the campus of Stanford University and on SiriusXM Insight 121. We'll be back in a second. Are we going to have some exciting music, or should we just start in? Okay. My producer says he wants some applause, so thank you so much for that first segment, Fei.
Thank you.
So, Fei, before the break, you were saying that this problem of hand washing is something that's amenable. So can you just take us through, are you actually taking pictures of people and checking whether they're washing their hands or not?
No, it's more nuanced than that. First of all, the most important thing is to protect everybody's privacy. So we are not taking pictures. We're using depth sensor. What is a depth sensor? This is a LiDAR sensor that your self-driving car technology will be using to see if the car is running into obstacles.
LiDAR is a laser-type radar.
Right. This is also the same sensor if you play video games like Xbox that can see your gestures. So we're using the same sensor that can sense human movement and gesture, and then we put it in the hospital unit, and now we can, for the first time ever, we can track continuously the hand hygiene practice of the practitioners. Just in contrast, before this technology, what hospitals use is what they call human monitors. So they would hire someone, a nurse or a trained...
Typically quite annoying.
Yeah. And they make mistakes. They don't see enough things. They have attention span, a short attention span, and all this. And they cannot be there all the time. And now our sensors can continuously feed data about how doctors and nurses are washing their hands.
Now, I know that one of the other applications that you're at least thinking of, and I don't know if you've acted on this, is the idea of home care for the elderly. Talk to me about what might be possible there.
Yes. So aging society is one of the biggest problem in the whole globe, America, Japan, and Europe, and many countries. So one of the very important goal for having a quality aging life is independent living, because it's important for the seniors. But how do we ensure the quality of independent living? And how do we help the friends and families to take care of elders who wants their independence and privacy, but also need to be taken care of when needed? So in the collaboration with a Unlock organization, which is a San Francisco-based senior home for low-income seniors, we have sensors now installed in some of their test unit to start pilot the idea of using these depth sensors to look at the behaviors of the living behaviors of seniors, and to help the early detection, especially of things like dementia, lack of social activity, nutrition intake, sleep patterns.
So this is based on the assumption that the motion patterns in the room will be able to be associated with important behaviors that a doctor or a healthcare provider would care about knowing on a day-to-day, even minute-to-minute basis.
This is why I call it a guardian angel. It's quiet, it's continuous, it doesn't interrupt your life, but it's there for you and providing the help when needed.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman, and we're talking with Fei Li, the director of the Stanford AI Lab and the Stanford Vision Lab. We started with ImageNet. We then went to its applications in hand washing, and now we're watching our parents and grandparents, and soon ourselves, and develop dementia, basically. I think
if you put it that way.
Yes, forgive me. So I don't want to leave this conversation without discussing the societal challenges, the non-technical challenges to AI. Yes. It's a lot to ask you as a technologist to also be worrying about. You mentioned privacy earlier in the discussion about hand washing. How do these teams that you work with, these interdisciplinary teams, how do you think about the decisions that society has to make about when AI is okay and when we need to perhaps stay away from it? Or is that even a conversation?
Oh, it absolutely is a conversation. When I became the director of Stanford AI Lab, the first thing I did about 3 years ago is to start a series called AI Salon that welcomes AI students and faculty and speakers to join us to discuss bi-weekly the issues, the societal issues. As a technologist, I really believe in the benevolent responsibility of technology, and it's really important, especially something as powerful as AI. I think it's an important moment in human history that we think about these things, be it privacy, ethics, bias, alternative facts, data, and diversity. All these issues, I think, are really, really important.
So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do.
That's your job.
Is our society, who are not the technologists, do you believe that our governmental and non-governmental organizations are paying sufficient attention to these issues, or are we going to be caught with new technologies that we're not ready for?
So first of all, human nature, human civilization will never stop innovating. That's in our blood. It's in our DNA, and I'm an optimist in the sense that I watch the progress of human civilization. I think every time we create a technology, there is a strong positive force in our society to want to use this technology for the better of human society. But I don't think we should be completely naive about it. Technology is in the hands of people, and Shannon Whaler is a neighborhood philosopher in Santa Clara University. I love what she said. Machine value. There's no separate machine value. Machine value is human value. So I think it's so important we talk about this. It's so important we talk about AI today. I want to talk about AI responsibly. I want to talk about AI informed, and I want to talk about AI with a diverse and inclusive voice. So that's what I care about.
Well, thank you, and that is a great way to end this. And I'm sorry we could go on for much longer. You know, Feifei and I have worked together on one other project earlier this last year. Stanford co-hosted a White House summit on AI, the future of AI, and it included both the technical and the social issues. And it really gave us hope that governmental leaders and staff within the government, bureaucrats, were thinking about this, and we're putting together programs for making sure that this society is ready for these technologies so that we can maximize the benefit and minimize what we call in medicine adverse effects. So thank you very much for coming,
Thank you,
Feifei,
Russ.
and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
In a few minutes, we'll be talking about the future of autonomous vehicles with Chris Gerdes, the director of the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford. But first, this is a big one, I was fortunate enough to ride in one of Chris's driverless cars. Let's hear how that went. So here we are in Willows, California. Thanks for meeting us. We were here bright and early. We have before us, I believe, Marty, the car. And what's the deal with Marty?
So Marty is our electrified, self-driving, drifting DeLorean. So Marty is part of a project to figure out how we can control cars up to the very limits of their capabilities. So race car drivers, drivers who involve in drift events, tend to use all the friction between the tire and the road to either be fast or dramatic. We want to learn to do the same thing in order to be safe.
So today we're going to do some drifting maneuvers. We're going to drift around this first cone over here.
When's the last time you checked the airbags?
There are no airbags.
Okay.
There is, however,
Cut. I think I should disclose now that I get very car sick. We're going to get in, we're going to do some donuts, we're going to burn some rubber, and we're going to see how Russ and how the driver does. Time to helmet up. All right. We're ready to go.
It's a hazard. I now have no plate.
This is a very cool car. I have no idea what I'm about to experience. I do have a plastic bag from one of my producers, which I will use if I need to. This is the future of everything.
All right, you ready? What I'm going to do is lift my foot off the brake and put us into autonomous mode, at which point Marty will zoom forward to begin testing. Okay, here we go.
Okay, Marty is now going. We are accelerating. We're heading right towards a quote. No, we're not heading right towards anything, actually. We're now spinning around and accelerating. I am looking at the orange cone. I'm looking for the orange cone. Now I can see it. The orange cone is right there. Whoa! Woo! We did it! firma. Excuse me. Okay, that was awesome. I can vouch that he never touched the steering wheel. Everything you saw was done by some computer somewhere. I think we did some science. It's hard to believe because I'm a little shaky right now, but we did some science. We learned some things. And there you have it. I go to Lake Tahoe a lot from Menlo Park, Stanford area, and it's about 215 miles from my house, and it takes 3.5 or so hours to get there. And I like to ride my bicycle on Stanford campus and around town because it is just miserable, rain or shine. It is miserable to drive on Stanford campus. So when I think of self-driving cars, I think of those two scenarios. The long, boring drive where I want to fall asleep, but as I actually get up into the mountains, it gets curvier, and then in the last few months, icier, and it's very scary. 2 or 3 times this winter, I've just had to let go of the car and let it finish its slide totally out of control, not like what you just saw. And then when I drive around the university, it's totally different. It's not that it's boring, it's that I'm positive that I'm going to run over students. And that's really bad for many reasons that I won't go into. So when I thought about self-driving cars, it was about, okay, getting around town, long, boring drives, sign me up. But what I did not think about was doing donuts and drifting in a very cool DeLorean named Marty. By the way, if the Marty DeLorean thing doesn't make any sense to you, just Google Marty and DeLorean. It's a big deal. It has something to do with Back to the Future. The thing that isn't clear in this video that I want to stress is, first of all, before they put me in the car, Chris demoed to me what the car was going to do. So they had the car do its thing, and at the end of that, he showed me the skid marks, and they made a perfect black circle around one of those cones that we were driving around. And after my drive with Chris, we got out of the car, and he pointed out again, of course he was very modest about this, but I thought it was amazing, that the skid marks from the drive we had just done were almost perfectly superimposed on the skid marks from the first test drive that he had done. Now, this was significant because the weight had changed in the car. As Chris taught me, the tires are entirely different tires at the end of one drive because you burn so much of the rubber that it's an entirely different vehicle, and yet their control systems made these perfectly superimposable. So that made me realize, and we're going to talk about this, that the self-driving cars may be most remarkable, not for recapitulating the things that I can do, like drive to Tahoe or try not to hit Stanford students on campus, but help me when I'm in situations where I have no clue what to do, no training, no credentials, and in fact, in the last 6 months, it's happened to me 3 times where I'm just sliding around. Well, it happened 4 times, but 1 time was under total control, and 3 times where I was just going along for the ride and was just glad that I didn't go over a cliff. So, my guest today, Chris Gertis, as you know, is from the Stanford Mechanical Engineering Department. He hosted me up in Willows, and I'd like to welcome him up to the stage. Thanks for coming, Chris, and thanks for hosting us. That was an awesome day.
My pleasure. Great to have you out at the track.
It was really awesome. This is in Willows, California. You might have to Google that. So, when will these driverless cars be available, and how will we roll them out into a mixed environment with humans and self-driving cars on the same road? How can we expect that all to unfold?
Well, I think if you go about 3 or 4 blocks off of campus, you're likely to run into one today. So these cars are already out on the street, and they're being tested in pretty similar ways. So the cars that you see today will have a human driver in there as a backup. And that's a really great safety feature because humans are fantastic at getting context, at being able to handle unusual situations. And so what you see are cars being developed in the streets of different cities and generally in fairly limited environments. And I think what you're going to see with the rollout strategy is that companies are going to get a lot of experience on a very few streets and then eventually say, you know, we feel confident enough in this,
or we're going to let the vehicles go out without a safety driver. And I think it's going to start with a few streets in a few cities and expand out from there.
So I know that you served your country, literally, as doing a brief stay, or not so brief, at the Department of Transportation earlier in 2016 and before. Is there a plan? Is the government, kind of the same question we talked to Feifei about, is the government on top of this, or is the industry leading and hoping that the government will catch up?
So I think the government is on top of this. One of the things that we did in my stint there at the Department of Transportation was to produce the national policy on automated vehicles. So there is a federal policy on automated vehicles, and it handles a complicated chicken and egg problem, which is a lot of people say we should have government standards, we should have some sort of regulations, but that assumes you know what the solution is, right? You can't have standards before you know the best way of doing something. And we're still trying to figure out what are good ways of handling automated vehicles. So the idea was to do voluntary guidance, to have some guidelines for states that want to be active, to have some guidelines for manufacturers and say, these are the 15 points that you need to address in a safety assessment. We want to make sure that you're addressing these things before you go out on the road. So address those up front, give us the information in a letter, and then go out and test. And let's let the testing of these vehicles in a safe environment generate the data which can be used to then develop good data-driven decisions and regulations.
Have you or the industry or the government or anybody come up with kind of phases? Is there going to be a phase where there has to be a human who can grab the wheel? I've read that some companies are taking the we don't want any wheel, we don't want a steering wheel in the car. So is that, does it get down to that level of detail, or are you allowing kind of 1,000 flowers to bloom and see how it goes?
Yeah, the whole idea behind the guidance is based on this concept of an operational design domain. And the operational design domain basically says, tell us what this car is supposed to do. And then tell us how you've handled consumer education around that, how you've handled fallback systems and safety systems. So you may say, I'm designing a car that doesn't have a steering wheel, that actually doesn't have brakes or accelerators or any sort of driver controls, at which point the question would be, okay, if something goes wrong, what is your backup solution? Some companies may say, well, we want to remote monitor that. Or you may say, I am developing an automated vehicle. It's going to have a safety driver. It's going to rely on the operator of the vehicle to take over in these circumstances. And then the question will be, okay, how do you know they're going to be alert and attentive enough to do that? So the whole idea is define what the vehicle is capable of doing, and it may be only capable of operating on clear days below 25 miles an hour on these 7 streets, but that's okay.
So you might have those kinds of prescriptions in the approval. It'll be approved subject to these uses.
Well, it's
we do this for medications actually all the time.
Yeah, at this point it's voluntary guidance, but the idea is that they would submit a safety assessment letter and have this discussion.
So this is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman, and we're talking with the director of the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford, Chris Gerdes. Chris, what are the challenges technically that you and your students are laying up at night awake worrying about these days? That was pretty impressive. But I'm pretty sure you're not done. So what are the current challenges?
Yeah, so I think you saw an example of being able to push the limits of the car's capabilities. And as you said in your open, the same sorts of physics, the same sort of math that we use to solve that problem applies to the exact same problem of I've run out of friction because of an icy road. This is just more dramatic and visually appealing. It gets you invited to radio shows. So that's one of the reasons we're studying it. But it essentially at its core is the same problem. And we think there's still a few more years of research available to us in this, but then honestly, we think that we can give automated vehicles the skills of the very best humans, maybe even better than the very best humans in controlling a car under any situation. So there's still some research to be done, but we're pretty confident in that. One of the areas that we think is really an open issue is understanding how these vehicles will interact with humans. And so when we think about an automated vehicle now going out on the road, what are our expectations of it? How safe does it need to be? How do I quantify safety? What are the proper interactions? You mentioned going on campus around Stanford students. You have some ways of doing that. You make eye contact. You may have some particular expectations of knowing students on their phone are more likely to walk out in front of you than students who aren't. You'll have all of this context. How do we program that in an automated vehicle, and will people interact with it in the same way that they interact with human-driven vehicles?
So does your group also worry about those higher level kind of intentional programming of the vehicle, because what we saw was really a feat of physics and dynamic unstable systems. But then on top of that, you have to kind of give it goals, and one goal is just get me from here to there, but another goal is, I don't want to kill anybody, and am I going to have to set up my car to say, if it's either me or a pedestrian, make it be me?
Well, can you face palm on the radio? Does that get through?
He just face palms.
I think I hear this all the time. There seems to be this misperception out there that automated vehicles are driving around making these moral judgments of who is more worthy of living.
Hit Altman. Hit Altman.
And in
Run
fact,
him over.
Yeah, exactly. So we've programmed it. No.
No.
So it's no wonder people have this idea in mind. There's in fact even a website, the Moral Machines website at MIT, that is attempting to crowdsource this. So you can literally say, do I run over the 5 cats or the 5 dogs? Does it matter that the dogs are actually crossing with the light and the cats are not? Or do I kill the 5 criminals who are obeying the law and crossing with the light? Or do I run over the 2 physicians, the homeless person, and the 2 cats that are crossing against the light? If you think I'm making this up, no, check it out. These are real cases. And I think it's created this mindset. I mean, it's like Stephen King's Christine, that we have these automated vehicles going, who lives, who dies? And in reality, I think what we're doing is we're programming cars to avoid these sorts of collisions. And in fact, the arguments at cocktail parties around here are, can you believe these self-driving cars are going at 25 miles down the road and I can't get past them? So
I must say, I've had my first self-driving car road rage incidents because, so those of you who live, I'm sorry, I'm going to take some of your time.
No, go for it.
So I was driving on El Camino, and I can deal with one slow Google self-driving car, but there were 2 of them taking up both lanes on El Camino, and they were going the exact speed limit, which was, let me just be honest, 15 to 25 miles per hour less than I felt safe going. And so I decided on the spot to give the Google guys some data about road rage. And so by the way, I have a very old car, and so I don't care what happens to it. I got as close to the car as I could get, 6 inches, and followed it to say, I hope I can really mess up their algorithm so they can go back and figure out we really should have made it go on faster. So it was enraging, and I'd like to claim an early road rage incident.
Well, so I probably should then go back to my question of what are the big technical challenges. It's you. But if I...
I think my producer wants me to say that this is the future of everything, and I'm talking to Chris Curtis, even though you wouldn't be able to tell because I've been talking too much. He's the director of the Center for Automotive Research. Go on.
Great. So I want to come back to this road rage that you described, and this is exactly the sort of ethical discussion that we have to have. So I can program a car to be ridiculously safe and to crawl down the street, right? So I know what the limits are, and this is where our research has evolved from. Okay, can we get the car to do everything it's physically capable of doing? Great. Now, how do we be proactive? How slowly can we go down that street and still avoid that pedestrian? And the answer is, well, I could go very, very slowly, but then I've got people being driven into road rage. So how do we answer those questions? Those are the real ethical questions around self-driving cars, not who kills who. It really is a question of what are our values around safety, legality, mobility? How do these things play off of each other? If you look at the California Vehicle Code, you'll see that you're not supposed to cross that double yellow lane divider. But almost everybody in the hills around here that I've seen will do it to give extra space to a bicycle. Well, so do we program the automated vehicle to do what humans do, or do we program it to follow the law? These are the sorts of ethical questions that I think we need to answer so that societal acceptance of these vehicles is quite high.
So that forces me to conclude, and tell me if this is right, that you have to put together incredibly interdisciplinary teams on your projects. This cannot just be about mechanical engineers, or do you have incredibly ethically aware mechanical engineers? Who does this work, and who is doing it?
Yeah, so we have a lot of mechanical engineers in my group, but we work very actively with other disciplines as well. So we've had philosophers here as visiting faculty. Patrick Lynn from Cal Poly has been here on leave with us to study some of these issues. There's a number of other philosophers that we've worked with as well. We had a program in the legal aspects of automated driving, which brought Bryant Walker-Smith here for a few years. He's now a professor at the University of South Carolina, but remains a collaborator.
So So I think a lot of us are pretty excited about this, but we're nervous. Are there things that are showstoppers? In other words, you've described that there are these problems and there are ways for us to approach them. Are there things on the roadmap? I'm sure you have in your head a roadmap of what needs to happen. Which are the big ones that could really be a problem and be a no-go for self-driving cars? I mean, you say they're already out there, but I guess there could be a no advance. Like, we're not going to go further than where we are. Or are there actually no such barriers, and it really is going to be a pretty smooth transition into this new world?
Well, I think there are barriers, and I think really what society thinks of these vehicles, how society as a whole responds, will be very important because automated vehicles will not be perfect. There will be accidents. In fact, that's one of the questions we're trying to answer. Right now, humans compensate for other humans' mistakes. And to what extent does the automated vehicle have to do that?
Like anticipating that he's going to swerve, she's going to swerve, so I better swerve.
Exactly. Or even if a pedestrian steps out in front of you, it may not be physically possible to stop. So what does the automated vehicle do? What is its best effort? With humans, we judge whether or not that was reasonable. Does the same standard apply? Yeah. And so I think how these things are programmed and what happens with these initial accidents are going to be extremely important. Who can talk about this? And how do we make sure that the benefits are spread throughout society? If you think right now, there are a lot of very expensive sensors on these vehicles, but there's no reason a few years from now that the sensor package can't get down to a couple of thousand or even a few $100s. So you start thinking about that. I could have an automated vehicle. Let's say it cost me $40,000 to manufacture. I only get 150,000 miles out of it. It can carry 4 people in a shared mobility concept. I'm talking probably about 10 cents a mile transportation cost. Now, if I am suffering from transportation, there was a study from Harvard that showed that, in fact, access to affordable transportation was one of the biggest barriers to people escaping poverty. If I can get transportation from my house to my workplace at 10 cents a mile, that is a game changer. And so I think it's really important that we think about how are these benefits spread through society now.
So you said the workplace, and that gets me to this one issue that everybody wants to know about. Are we going to be putting too many people out of jobs? So how do we think about, and I think you could think about truck drivers, and you could think about taxi drivers. What's the deal there? Should we be worried about that? Is it not the problem that people are worried about? In promoting this show, I went on to the Sirius Truckers channel, and all they wanted to talk about was the 3.5 or 4 million jobs that self-driving cars were going to take away from them.
Yeah, so I think this is a real issue, and I think we should be talking about it. I think in the near term, there may be some opportunities for improving some of these jobs. So look at trucking, for instance. There's a shortage of truck drivers. Mental health issues are actually 40% greater in long-haul truck drivers than in the general population. These are tough jobs. But now if you think about it, if I'm actually driving one truck and perhaps I have other trucks following me that are now automated, the productivity can increase. I still have a human in there for handling certain situations that are difficult, for handling loading and unloading. And maybe I can design this in such a way that that's actually a more enjoyable job, and the logistics are such that this person gets home and sleeps in their bed every night because they can hand off to somebody else. So I think there are ways of doing this. It's likely not going to happen unless people put effort into it. But I do think there are ways in the near term to make some of these jobs dependent upon driving and transportation more fulfilling and perhaps easier on people. In the long run, I do have concerns about this because I think, in my experience talking with people who drive trucks, who drive taxis, this represents a fairly important rung on the economic ladder. And I almost never talk to somebody who's a taxi driver or driving for companies like Uber or Lyft who isn't doing something else as well. And so if you eliminate those opportunities, what have we done? I don't know, but it's an important question to ask.
So we're talking with Chris Gertis. This is the Future of Everything with Russ Altman, and we're at Stanford University and SiriusXM. Should we think about self-driving cars as basically autonomous robots? And are there rules for how robots should behave that we can borrow from?
Well, so one of the classic sets of rules for robots are Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. So a robot should not harm a human being or through inaction allow them to be harmed. And then the robot should obey orders given to it. by a human being unless that would conflict with the first law, for instance. We've looked at those. It turns out that as sort of a code of ethics or a complete set of programming, that doesn't work. And that, in fact, was kind of the whole point of Asimov's stories, right? He had these breakdowns as these laws attempted to be applied. It's really impossible unless we incite even more road rage on your part to really have a robotic vehicle that cannot cause harm, because I could jump out in front of it when it simply doesn't have enough time to react. And I really want to give some thought as to whether or not human override is really the thing that we want. And this is an interesting thing. So out on the racetrack at Thunder Hill, when we've taken our self-driving race car out there have been a couple of times when I've seen something that I wasn't quite sure about, and I hit the big red button, and in the time it took me to take control, the car ended up going off of the track because I couldn't take control quickly enough and get myself into that situation. So in retrospect, I would have been better to just ride it out and stop it later. This sort of sense that I could do something was strong, but actually misguided in that case. And so I think there are some laws, but not necessarily ones that we want. And this is a subject of some really amazing research right now.
I want to switch a little bit to the business of cars, because I think car business is something that many of us learn about, because a lot of us have bought cars, and we know that there are at least traditionally, there were the three big American ones, the three big American Detroit-based. There was these great companies in Europe, great companies in Japan. Are they all paying equal attention to this opportunity, or are we going to see a new vanguard of companies rising up? Because you hear about Google and Apple. I do not think about Google and Apple as car companies, but there's rumors that they care about this. So is this going to be a reshuffling of kind of who does cars in America or in the world?
I think absolutely you're going to see a reshuffling. You see a lot of Silicon Valley startups looking at this. You see a lot of established tech companies at this. You see every major automotive OEM figuring out how to play this. And what's interesting is over the course of the last maybe 9 to 12 months, you start to hear the same message emerging from all of these players, that we're moving towards a future of shared mobility. And the future is going to be around providing mobility as a service as opposed to selling individual units. So even the major OEMs are on board with this sort of general thrust, and they're acquiring companies or building out their own units or trying to find some sort of hybrid design where they can move quickly into these fields while at the same time leveraging the resources of a large manufacturer.
So just so I can understand, that means that it's possible that I will never actually own a self-driving car. I may use them as part of some kind of pooled resource. Is that what that means?
That's right. Certainly in the short term, if you think about it from an economic standpoint, if I am going to provide a self-driving car that makes sense to you as a service, I can actually put a lot of sensors on it. So long as I don't have to have a human driving it, I can make an economic argument that this is going to pay off. I don't have to get something at a price point that you would purchase. I just have to develop something that can provide you miles of mobility at a price that's competitive.
So this has been fantastically interesting, Chris. Fantastically interesting. Thanks so much. We've heard that this is the definition of disruptive. We have had for many, many decades a model about cars. You buy them, you drive them, they wear out, you get rid of them, you drive them. But now we're thinking about this, the players will change, the capabilities of the cars, as you saw and heard, will change, and even the economic model for how they go on. So this is a brave new world for cars, and it's happening right now. So thank you very much, and thanks for your work and sharing it with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So this has been great, and we're now going to invite Fei back up, and we're going to have questions from the audience. So there are two microphones, one in the middle of each aisle on the sides. We're going to do a little bit of a shuffle. Fei meet Chris, Chris meet Fei. The lights are up, and we'd really like to know what's on your mind about these two discussions we had. Just to remind you, we talked first about AI, especially about the revolution in ability to process images, and then sensor data for the care of elderly, and then we talked about autonomous self-driving cars. So do we have questions from the audience. We'll go back and forth. Please get up and go to the microphones. I'm going to be switching back and forth between microphones. Yes.
Yes, right now we have carpool lanes for electric vehicles and for carpools. Do you think we might have someday a transition where we have similar lanes for automated vehicles that might be able to move in a pack together, where they're going down the freeway faster and all together with closer bumpers together, so that we can make better use of the lane use?
So that was actually the automated highway system concept, and that was what got me started in this. I did my PhD work working on a system like that. I think people have, in general, moved away from that because of the infrastructure demands and the fact that if I'm going to do that, I need to have the ability to have that access to that space on the highway and cars specifically designed for that purpose. There are some efforts. In fact, I helped co-found a company, Peloton Technology, that is looking at platooning trucks. But a lot of the focus is on being able to do that with automated vehicles in mixed traffic on ordinary lanes. So there would be the possibility of doing that. It would be a lot easier, I think, than a lot of the problems that people are looking at. But it would be hard, I think, to argue for the right of way in many cases for that.
Hi, thanks for all the information. This is great. The question I have is that the approach or the feeling I get is that this is inevitable. And I feel like this frothiness about artificial intelligence from the 70s was the ability to see a block in a room and moving around the carpet, and then it never got there. And two questions. One is, selfishly, for all the people sort of driving, if it is inevitable, when do you think this would happen? Is it a couple years? Is it like 10 years or 20 years? I'm sort of thinking selfishly about retirement and not wanting to drive. And the other thing is, are you worried that maybe it's not inevitable and that this is going to tap out, and what we're going to effectively get is cars that just don't drift out of lanes and don't run into each other, but you're pretty much still driving?
You want to take a shot?
I think that's fine.
Okay, so in terms of when this will happen, I don't know. As I mentioned, I think this is going to happen on a few streets in select cities and roll out from there. I do think that if you look at software and the economics, once somebody is confident sending a car out without a driver in it, the proliferation of this will be much faster than people expect, because I can reproduce software at virtually zero cost. So it may not happen. Actually, I think the greater risk is that the technology happens, but we don't sort of organize this well enough. We don't organize public policy in a way to make sure that this technology leads us to the society that we want to have. And I think that's the real risk. I think the technology will come, but the question is, how do I make sure that's accessible, affordable, sustainable transportation for everyone, and not simply more automated vehicles clogging up the existing roadway?
On the left here?
Yeah, hi. I'm Chirag. My question is for Feifei. So the concept of this mass monitoring, unintrusive ways to kind of monitor, certain situations and, habits of people, very interesting. I have been for the longest of time researching something in terms of using personal devices. Like your mobile phone has so many sensors already built onto it. My dad suffers from Parkinson's, so I've been kind of trying to figure out, between his quarterly visits to the doctor, that's the only monitoring that a doctor does every 3 months, right? Now, if you have a sensor built into your phone, how fast he's walking, how fast did he swipe his phone this morning, what's the vibration in his voice is there anything, down this line that you've heard of? I'm just trying to figure out if there are teams already working on this concept, if there's some way, I can collaborate and maybe work with them. So you probably know what's happening in this field. That's what I wanted to hear from you.
So what you're suggesting is really in the realm of wearable devices for healthcare. And from companies to universities, there is a lot of people looking at that.
So the question is, again, to do with the amount of data that sensors can gather, and how you apply artificial intelligence to this to kind of devise trends and figure out whether the dosages are right. And this is like daily monitoring, right? And you apply that with artificial intelligence, there's so much more that can happen.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there is already a lot of startups mushrooming everywhere in using either mobile data or wearable, Fitbit, Apple Watch, these kind of data to monitor some aspect of health, be it nutrition, diet, fitness, and other habits. So it's already happening. There is ongoing research also in even at Stanford. I know we have a newly established centers dealing with e-wearable devices, and we can talk offline about the specific technology, but this is very much on people's mind.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm just curious about neural nets, training other neural nets. Is there research in that area or any applied work?
Absolutely. In fact, if you look at today Google's products, almost every one of them, Google Photo, Google Search Engine, Google Advertisement, all of that are involving neural network of some sort. So the newer name for that field is called deep learning, but it's rooted in neural network, and it really is infiltrating many areas of applied AI.
In terms of neural nets training other neural nets, I've heard about these adversarial systems. Could you describe those, because they're quite amazing, where they basically have a little battle?
Yes. So the latest is generative adversarial network, and then you have a network that generates samples, and another network that tries to achieve, for example, an image classification task using this generated samples and improve its performances. And there is a flurry. The year of 2016 in deep learning is adversarial networks.
Yeah, it's a very exciting name with the two networks battling it out. Yes.
Hi. So my question was about, we talked at the early part of your show about what definition of AI, and one of the accepted definitions is the Turing test, right? So 30% of the time, if you can't distinguish it between a real human, then for all intents and purposes, it is an intelligent system.
Just for background, the Turing test, very briefly, is you have a curtain, there's an agent on the other side of the curtain, you can't tell if it's a human or a computer. That means that computer has passed the Turing test.
30% of the time.
I've simplified it, but that's the idea, yes.
Yeah, 30% of the time. So the question is, would we get to a higher threshold? So for example, I don't know, pick a number, 50%, 70%, 80%. So that's sort of one question. And what would lead to that? What would lead to real intelligence? There's you talked about phones and medical applications. I just heard on the BBC the other day about an application called Babylon out of the UK. It's an AI application powered by AI that you speak to it like you're speaking to your doctor, right? And it uses NLP and deep learning and all of these other things. But the question is, where does the Turing test, the benchmark, the AI, how far would we push it? It's only recently that a computer broke. I think it was only 3 or 4 or 5 years ago that a computer, passed for a real human, or AI, passed the Turing test, in other words. They've been doing it regularly, but I'm just curious what you thought about it. What will actually lead to it? What kind of deep learning? You talked about GANs, you talked about CNNs, you talked about there's other things going on, obviously, so just wanted to get your thoughts.
So first of all, as an AI technologist, I take the Turing test much more figuratively than literally. I think one of Turing's biggest contribution, in addition for him as one of the greatest computer theorists, is really this inspiration of what a thinking machine is. His very specific setup of that curtain of a machine and a human behind the curtain and a natural language test, I think it's really only one aspect of machine learning. Whether we use the 30% threshold or the 80% threshold itself is not necessarily suggesting a full intelligence. In fact, one of the greatest joy of working in the field of artificial intelligence to me is it's constantly forcing me and my field to think about what exactly is intelligence, and this is still an ongoing question. One of my favorite way to compare humans and machines is that the machines are really, really fast, accurate, and stupid. Humans are really, really slow, inaccurate, and brilliant, because our intelligence that's packed in our brain and by evolution is extremely complex. It's not just computing for specific task. It's socialization, it's compassion, it's emotion, it's creativity, it's intention. It's it's a whole package of that. So we do not have a Turing test or any test that measures that complexity of intelligence. So that's one important clarification I want to make.
So Brad Templeton actually has proposed a test for autonomous vehicles. He actually said you will tell that the vehicle is truly autonomous when you ask it to take you to work and it drives you to the beach.
Sign me up for that one.
So as an expert on autonomous vehicles, what would you speculate? Would you think it's an easier problem to build autonomous planes and commercial ships and trains?
That's a really good question. And in fact, when I was at the Department of Transportation, I worked with all of the agencies. There are some interesting proposals. Rolls-Royce has a video online about a whole automated ship, container ship run from shore and what those operations might be like, which is actually pretty detailed in terms of how they diagnose problems with the team on shore. So that is a big capital investment, and the shipping industry is not doing particularly well financially. So there are some issues, barriers there financially, but in some ways it is an easier problem to remotely monitor and automate that. With aircraft, there are some amazing designs for light aircraft that people have looked at that would be, in fact, fully automated and would not require a pilot's license. Some of these are electric, would be miles, 60, 70 mile range. I think there's real sense there as a transportation solution. There are big barriers with our existing regulations for that, and that was one of the points that I drove home when I was there, was that we should be talking not only about unmanned drones and manned ground vehicles, but we need to think about things that would be occupied but uncrewed in the air.
Hi. Many of us have felt or experienced an increase in traffic in the Bay Area, so I like that you were talking about let's not just put a whole bunch of more autonomous cars on the road. So what kind of work is being done on systems to, help coordinate carpooling our kids to school, getting people to work, getting elders to their appointments, and how are they going to work with the people who are developing the self-driving cars?
Yeah, so there are a number of communities that are looking at different ways to bring technology to solve real problems. And one of the things that's nice to see is sort of starting to put the need first and then look for the technology second. And one of the great examples of this, the Department of Transportation sponsored the Smart City Challenge. So they went out to cities and basically said, we'll give you $30 million in a grant form, bring us your ideas. And the winning city was Columbus, Ohio. And one of the aspects that was really compelling in their application was they said, we've got this neighborhood, the Linden neighborhood in Columbus, with an infant mortality rate which simply should not exist in the developed world. It's incredibly high. So how do we tie transportation together with medical appointments for people who live there? How do we follow up if people don't make it? How do we make sure that they're arranging their transportation at the same time they make their appointment? And can we actually demonstrate measurable impact on this statistic in a few years to show the outcomes of it? And I think that's an example of the type of thinking which is really necessary to sort of get that need out there and then figure out how can technology meet that. And it's something that I'd like to see much more of.
Chris, following up on your comment on human-assisted driving, it seems over the next 10 years, the greatest benefit of this technology will be reduce the accident rate among human-driven cars. So as an engineer, and I've watched these systems develop, lane assistance and so forth, can you help me understand why the one thing that isn't talked about is speed control? Technically easy and could be the one thing that could really reduce the accident rate among human-driven cars.
That's a really interesting point. As we start to think about vehicles and we think about, well, how do I introduce an automated vehicle out on the highway? Is it going to follow the speed limit when nobody else is? Do I allow the automated vehicle to go faster? Do I get serious about speed limits? We had a visit a couple of years ago from the ambassador from France, and he was sharing a story that France apparently decided to raise their speed limits and then enforce them strictly. And he said it was quite a surprise going back and realizing that, in fact, that sort of buffer no longer existed. So that was an interesting example of a country that had decided to do that. So I think there are a number of approaches as we think about how to get automated vehicles out there. Not sure that speed is necessarily the most popular solution, even though it would save lives.
Okay, but my reflection was, why don't we put these for human-driven cars?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the one area they don't talk about.
Well, actually, with heavy trucks, they are talking about that. So that is in fact a rule currently in the rulemaking process, I believe, about speed limiters for heavy vehicles.
Just to set expectations for the people who've been waiting patiently, we probably only have time for 1 or 2 questions, so I just want to throw that out there, please.
Hi. This is a very simple question, and this question could be answered by Feifei or Chris or both of them. The question is about developing a humanoid robot that can drive in a conventional automobile or any other vehicle. Is anyone doing that? Anyone developing humanoid robot that can drive conventional automobile?
I'm aware of people doing a lot of humanoid robots and also cars that drive. I am not aware of places doing humanoid robot driving for the sake of driving, and I'm trying to think, why would you do that?
So they can get out of the car and make you dinner.
I was thinking they can take us to the beach.
So here's a
Yeah, right,
shameless
exactly.
plug. We're going to have a guest on the show, obviously not tonight, talking about humanoid robots, Professor Usama Khatib from Stanford. So we'll be addressing the issue of what they can and can't do in future episodes.
And there was a
Great.
DARPA
Thank you.
challenge actually like that, with the idea of creating a robot that could do some of these things.
Right.
But from the standpoint of automating vehicles, I think that actually makes the problem much harder than controlling the car directly.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll be brief. Could you talk about the current state of computer vision and the trajectory, in the sense that, do you think it's enough for computer vision to be supply the sensors for automated vehicles and not need LiDAR? So I guess in short, is Tesla right, or are the rest of them?
Well,
We
Tesla.
probably have at least 2 opinions on the.
Tesla did have an accident. So, so I think vision, when you talk about vision, you're really talking about RGB and visible spectrum. And I think one of the very nice thing about that is it's very cheap and it's very broad, but it does have limit, just like human vision in foggy days and with heavy rain and snow, or with some kind of particular lighting situation, you have a lot of issues, and the same limitation might happen in this type of sensor. So my personal take on self-driving car or any machine that needs to sense, especially the stake is so high, is a hybrid approach. Of course, I think a lot of the push in terms of sensor technology in self-driving car is to reducing the cost of LiDAR, because LiDAR is extremely expensive right now, and I think their cameras come in handy to supplement. But my personal hunch is that we're gonna see the cost of LiDAR driving down, but the working self-driving cars will be having hybrid sensors.
Yeah, I think obviously you're not going to get traffic lights with anything other than a camera. So cameras are sort of a part of any automated vehicle that's going to go in urban environments. There's a lot of interesting advances with very high resolution radar. A number of companies are working on this, as well as solid state LiDAR. So the sensor technologies that we have to choose from today are probably not going to be the palette that we have to choose from 5 years from now, and the cost is coming down dramatically. So at some point you have to kind of ask, if it costs $100 or $200 and I can bring in multiple sensors and add redundancy, why not have everything?
Hi. So you talked about some of the decision dilemmas that an AV faces, like whether to kill Group A or Group B.
I said that's not a dilemma it actually faces.
Okay,
just
but
for clarification.
to me, at least all the situations that I've read about, seem a little more hypothetical. What about a more practical situation of 4 AVs on a 4-way stop sign?
Well, that's one that Google has talked about as being one that requires a little bit of negotiation, because it's one of those situations where we tend to use subtle cues. For instance, if your algorithm is programmed to wait for the other cars to actually stop, in California, it may be waiting for a long time. So that's one of these areas where social aspects come in. I completely agree. There's some really interesting scenarios that are more realistic in terms of decision making. One that I like to use is if you have a van that's blocking the view of an intersection and you have a green light, how quickly do you go knowing that there could be a pedestrian there? These are situations that come up once you start to pay attention to them probably multiple times every time you drive around an urban area. So I think there's a lot where we can actually talk about decision making without creating fanciful scenarios.
But I guess on a broader level, maybe the question can be posed this way. Are the autonomous vehicles right now still trying to make decisions assuming that everybody else is a human driver, or they're already thinking about other AVs on the road?
I think right now they're trying to make decisions with the expectation that the other drivers on the road may act in a broad variety of ways. If the other drivers on the road are going to be automated and act in a much more predictable way, the problem gets easier. But until we get there, people are having to solve the harder problem.
We're going to keep on going until my producer, Brian, tells me in my ear to stop. So keep going.
Hi. So obviously autonomous cars aren't going to become universal immediately, right? There will be a transition in which human drivers will have to drive on the roads alongside autonomous drivers, and we have these these small gumdrop-shaped cars from Google, and as Russ mentioned, they go 25 miles an hour in El Camino, which is a speed limit of 35, which is infuriating.
Thank you. You may have more time.
Also, there was the story of the Tesla accident, which was caused by, I may have the story wrong, which is caused by the driver being overconfident in Tesla's autopilot system, which is not quite at the level of maturity that he thought it was. So can you comment on how we as humans can coexist with these robot drivers until they become our overlords?
Well,
there's no loaded question there.
No, actually, I was just reminiscing of my son when he was younger. Said, Dad, when the Transformers come to Earth, I think they'll think you're okay because you work with robot cars. So how do we coexist with this? Well, I think there's a couple of questions. One is sort of sharing the road. The other is actually sharing control of an individual vehicle. And this is an area where I think it's really important that there be clear understanding of what is a vehicle capable of, what are its responsibilities, and what is the driver capable of. And in the federal automated vehicle policy, there actually is a very large section on that sort of consumer education. And have you done enough to make sure that people are aware of the limitations of the system and what it can't do? So it is a tricky balance when you try to share control with that, and making sure that the vehicle is aware of that and the human is aware of that is extremely important. With respect to sharing the road, I think, yes, making sure that these vehicles will drive with us in a manner that we think is appropriate is really important. Otherwise, you will have people starting to pass legislation about not letting vehicles on certain roads or things like that. And so this is an area where I think proactive discussion is necessary. Otherwise, we're going to have all sorts of states and localities doing different things in a bit of a mess.
So
Speaking of
sorry, I just want to add one thing. I generally believe with the speed of technology improving, that the age of human-machine co-working and existing together has begun, and this is more reason to invest in more basic science research, from technology to laws to moral philosophy and ethics and all this, to really give us guidance in terms of how humans can coexist with machines.
Very good. My overlord has told me that we have the last two questions on the left where you've been waiting the longest, and I apologize to those on the right and to number 3 on the left. But please.
Hi, I'm Nick, and I had a question for Chris, which was one of the aspects of autonomous vehicles that seems to me to be a little bit up in the air is with regards to insurance. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Specifically, I feel like with autonomous cars, it seems somewhat unclear about whether in the future we'll have insurance for the passengers in a shared vehicle, whether we'll insure the manufacturer of the vehicle, whether we'll insure the programmers of the vehicle or the software maker. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I
State
think
Farm is drooling.
Well, actually, I gave a talk there, and they said, one of the questions that was asked was, is this going to mean that we're writing basically one insurance policy per automaker, and if so, which agent gets that commission? Which I thought was a great question that sort of gets to the heart of how this upends our thinking about auto insurance. So right now, it is an individual policy thing because we're insuring individual risk. There really is no need to insure that individual risk once you have an automated vehicle. It really is shifting from individuals' actions to product liability. And you already have some companies that are developing these systems really stepping up and saying, yeah, if we develop these products, we will actually be responsible for them. And if you talk to several people within the industry who've worked in this, they say, the auto industry is used to getting sued for their products already. This isn't really such a change for us. The product does more, but this is a litigation environment in which we've been operating for a long, long time.
And just to follow up on that, for this year, I'm actually on sabbatical working at Google Cloud, which we work with a lot of vertical industries, including insurance and financial industries. One thing that's fascinating for me as a technologist to observe is that a lot of these deep vertical industries, like financial institutions, are being rapidly disrupted by new technologies, and this is something that we don't experience in the consumer space, but the fourth industrial revolution of automation and intelligent computing is making changes everywhere.
Final question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ankush. I guess I'm going to have the last word.
Yes.
This question is for Fei-Fei, and I'm going to change the gear a bit here. So my question is around computation. So real good artificial intelligence requires lots of computation. So we are currently in the world of classical computers, CPUs. Now we have advanced to GPUs. Google is doing TPUs. They call it the TensorFlow processing units. And now we are looking at the advent of quantum computing. So my question to Fei-Fei is, what kind of AI applications do you think would quantum computing enable?
Oh boy, that is a tough question. So I am not an expert in quantum computing. From my shallow understanding, first, quantum computing itself is a means to increase the capacity of computing. And if you look at today's AI algorithms, there is a huge limit in terms of the ability for the computing hardware to process the amount of data and then to do inference or learning in the right amount of time. So just a very, very straightforward answer for that is quantum computing, if successfully developed and deployed, will significantly increase the computing capacity of the AI applications. But there's more to computing than just quantum computing. The computers we use these days is the von Neumann architecture, but as devices start to really percolate and just dominate the whole world, computing on device in very fast time, small space, low energy, and all this is actually driving very new thinking in computing architecture, and that's another very exciting area that will be coming, and it's intimately related to the inference of AI applications. So we're seeing multiple threats going on the computing front.
Well, with that, I would like to draw this show to a close. I want to thank Fei-Fei Li, Chris Gertis, and the audience for your participation today.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you so much. And as I like to say when I teach, this ends the formal portion of our program. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.